Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, those viewing via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to this Central Committee meeting number 9 of today, Thursday, November 24, 2022. I would like to give a special welcome to the representatives of the Integrity Chamber present here today. We have established a quorum of 9 members. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. I have received notice of absence from the following members: MP Melissa Gums and MP Ludmila De Wever. Are there any other notifications? Thank you for no notifications. We have as agenda point for this meeting, Annual Report 2021, Integrity Chamber, document IS/966/2021-22, dated May the 31st of 2022. We go over to the agenda point. On May 31st, 2022, Parliament received a copy of the 2021 Annual Report of the Integrity Chamber. This document registered as incoming document IS/966/PY22-23 and can be found on the P drive of Parliament. At this time, I would like to give the floor to the representatives of the Integrity Chamber for some introductory remarks and presentation. I give the floor to Mr. Raphael Bosman. Mr. Bosman, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, honorary members of Parliament. Allow me also, on behalf of my colleague members of the Integrity Chamber, to thank you for inviting us to elucidate on our annual report of 2021. With me present this afternoon are our Director, Ms. Shaina Pompier, our Deputy Director, Ms. Gabi Fuchs, Senior Advisor, Mrs. Amanda Brown, and our Communication Officer, Mr. Kevin James. Ms. Pompier and Mr. James will give a short presentation highlighting the tasks and responsibilities of the Integrity Chamber and also the activities undertaken by the Chamber in 2021. Thereafter, we will try to answer any questions the honorary MPs may have to the best of our ability. And now, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I will turn the floor over to our Director, Ms. Pompier, for the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks again for allowing us this opportunity to present our Annual Report 2021. We've prepared a short presentation on the Annual Report. First, we're going to talk about the structure of the Integrity Chamber, and then the tasks. Then we're going to give a financial overview and discuss the specific activities that were undertaken in 2021. First, the structure. The Integrity Chamber consists of 3 members. Those members are Mr. Raphael Bosman, Mrs. Rian Vogels, President, and Mr. Hans Lotter. The members are appointed for a term of 3 years and can be reappointed once. The Integrity Chamber is supported by a secretariat. The secretariat consists of local professionals who are responsible for carrying out the day-to-day activities of the Integrity Chamber, which includes the main tasks, which I'll get to in a bit. And finally, we have a supervisory council, which is a unique part of the structure of the Integrity Chamber. The supervisory council also consists of 3 members, and they are responsible for making sure that the Integrity Chamber executes its tasks lawfully and proportionately, and also give permission to use certain authorities that the Integrity Chamber has, and they handle complaints as well if there is any complaints against the way that the Integrity Chamber is handling or using its authorities. We have 3 tasks. Those are to investigate suspected misconducts, to give advices and proposals to improve integrity within government and government entities, and to create awareness in society on the importance of integrity. Then an overview of our financials in 2021. As you can see, we received 1.9 million. This was lower than budgeted, and our total cost was 1.8 million. So we have a balance of, we had a balance of 136,905 guilders in 2021. It's important to note that this this budget would not have been enough if there wasn't reduced activities due to the pandemic. As you can see, as you will see in the rest of the presentation, we did not do any comprehensive investigations in 2021, and our awareness activities also started halfway through the year. It was also not possible for us to travel due to the pandemic, and hiring certain staff members was also not possible in 2021. And for these and other reasons, we still managed to survive, so to speak, within the budget that we received, but under normal circumstances that would not have been sufficient. Then our advices and proposals. First, our investigations. So Integrity Chamber is responsible for investigating suspected misconducts. Those can be done based on notifications or on our own initiative. The investigations are not criminal but administrative in nature. You can see for the year 2021, we had 7 notifications of suspected misconduct, and we did 1 preliminary investigation. So there was no comprehensive investigations in 2021, and as a result, there was also no binding advices. Then our advices and proposals. We focused a lot on giving advices and proposals in 2021. And the reason for that is we tried to make sure that there was a standard, so to speak, for integrity within the organization. So as you can see with some of the advices, I'm going to explain them in a slightly more detail in a bit, but most of our advices are focused on basic policies and procedures that are necessary to improve integrity within government. The first advice was advice on the implementation of the Civil Servant Code of Conduct. This was something that we realized was missing within government, but when we looked a little bit further, it was that they did have a Civil Servant Code of Conduct that was approved on May 29th, 2019 by national decree. However, it was never implemented. So nobody, or most people then, did not know of its existence. So our advice to government was, of course, to implement it as soon as possible. The reason a code of conduct is so important is that it gives shared rules, norms, and values for civil servants within the organization. We often think to ourselves that people should know better, but if you often don't teach them to do better, then they won't know to do better, and a code of conduct would help in that, because it not only gives shared rules and norms and values, but also guides ethical decision-making and can prevent conflicts. So we advised on that, and we also gave some recommendations to ensure that when it's rolled out, that civil servants not only are aware of it, but that they understand what what's expected from them. The Ministry of General Affairs, who is responsible for rolling out the Civil Servant Code of Conduct, responded that they would implement the Code of Conduct by the first quarter of 2022. Unfortunately, that is still not the case, but we are working with them to make sure that that is implemented as soon as possible. The next advice was the advice on appointment of confidential advisors. This is also something that is required by law, and the LMA actually prescribes that every ministry should have at least one confidential advisor. That is currently not the case. In 2014, there were confidential advisors appointed. However, after their term ended, there were no more reappointments, and so since then, there has not been any confidential advisors. So we have advised them to reappoint confidential advisors for the different ministries. We also gave some tips on how to do that it should be a transparent process, because people need to feel comfortable going to a confidential advisor.
What is a confidential advisor?
Okay, I'll get it. So people need to feel comfortable going to a confidential advisor. The role of a confidential advisor is actually it's somebody that the civil service can go to advise them on different ethical issues that may be happening within the organization. It can be different things, and sometimes you would realize a lot, and we've seen it also as an integrity chamber, sometimes people just need somebody to talk to give them advice on how to deal with certain situations. And the confidential advisor would help with that. It would allow the government to deal with also certain issues internally before they have to escalate to a level where it, blows up and gets out of hand. So it really is, one of those elements within government or in any organization. In fact, it's used a lot also in the private sector, where you have somebody that people can go to just to discuss different issues that's happening, and who can help guide them on what to do next, whether that is file an official complaint, or maybe just have a conversation with somebody. They can help maybe to facilitate a conversation, to resolve different issues. So they're just a kind of a guide for civil servants to help with different issues that they might encounter within government. So for us, that's something that's really important. Like I was saying, we gave advice on not only the process for the implementation, but also to make sure that the confidential advisors have the infrastructure and facilities necessary to be able to do their job effectively. The ministry responded, and in this case is also the Ministry of General Affairs, that they are committed to making sure that this is implemented. Another advice was the advice based on the quick scan of the Ministry of Justice. The quick scan is actually a different type of advice, because it's more based on getting a sort of a baseline integrity measurement within the ministry. So what we look at is the integrity infrastructure of the ministry, and in that we look at the different laws, policies, procedures, anything that's related to integrity to help improve integrity within the organization. We also looked at the different integrity risks that the different ministries and departments within the ministries would have, the challenges that they're facing, and the areas of improvement, also for our understanding as an integrity chamber, because for us to be able to give the best advice possible, we also need to understand some of the challenges that they're dealing with, which would help us to help them improve integrity within the organization. So out of the quick scan of the Ministry of Justice, some of the things that we saw was issues relating to a lack of organizational stability, issues relating to a lack of material and human resources, and issues because of the lack of trainings and courses for civil servants within the ministry. And the idea is that we do quick scans for all the ministries within government. So we started with the Ministry of Justice, but we will do all 7 ministries to get an understanding of them all. Next, we did an advice on the draft long lease policy of the Ministry of Romi. This was actually an advice that was requested from the Minister of Romi. At the time, they were busy working on their draft long lease policy, and we, based on the draft that was received at that time, we gave some recommendations in order to improve the policy and to help reduce integrity risks. So one of the recommendations was to make sure that there aren't any arbitrariness in the procedure, perceived arbitrariness in the procedure. We also advised that there should be written internal procedures. So a lot of time we have a procedure that is for people applying for the long lease land, which is also important, but it's equally important to have an internal procedure, because based on that internal procedure, you would be deciding on whether or not that application is complete, if the person is will be granted the long lease. So you want to make sure that your internal procedures also ensure integrity in all aspects. So some of the things, for instance, that we advise on with regards to the internal procedure is a 2I principle, for instance, that there's not just one person who's going to decide if an application is complete or that it's passed, not passed, but if it's granted, yes or no. We advised on establishing a land register. We advised on the enforcement of the legislation, because what we see sometimes is that there is no enforcement of the existing long lease that has been granted. And we also advised on implementing a complaint procedure. That last one is also very important. I think we've all heard the Ombudsman complain that there are certain ministries that she gets a lot of complaints about, and I think the Ministry of Romy was one of them. And by having an internal complaint procedure where you can help, we can have a system for dealing with complaints and answering citizens when they have a complaint against a process or a decision, I think that would help reduce also complaints that's going to the Ombudsman if the ministry can deal with a lot of those type of things themselves. And here also the Ministry of Romy has committed to implementing our recommendations to that draft long lease policy. Finally, we have two proposals that we submitted. And those proposals were regarding the facility services. The facility services policies within government are very broad. They cover a lot of different aspects, from cleaning to IT to from what you can see here, housing. What we advised on, or what we proposed on, was the government housing management policy and a government vehicle management policy. And both of those areas within the facility services are areas that there can be a lot of risk of misuse. So we took a look at the existing policy that they had, and we gave recommendations to improve it, to prevent integrity risks, to make things more transparent, that there is more accountability. We revised on the procurement procedures regarding to housing and vehicle management, and also on enforcement and compliance, and finally on evaluation of the policies to continuously improve them when loopholes are discovered. Next, I'm going to pass the floor to Mr. Kevin James, our Communication Officer, who is going to tell you a little bit about awareness and why integrity is important.
Good afternoon, honorable members of Parliament. Thank you, Ms. Pompier, for the floor. So I'm going to discuss a bit about our awareness activities in 2021. And the activities that we carried out could fall into three categories. The first category being introduction activities. And this is where we reached out to various organizations that are our stakeholders that we have to work with to establish relationships with them so that we could set the grounds for collaboration going forward. There was also the focus on societal awareness, and that was allowing the community to learn more about the Integrity Chamber, how we work, and how they can make use of this tool that they have within the civil service. And the third category was integrity topics, where we engage discussions about integrity in various contexts so that people could understand how it relates to their situation and what it means in different scenarios. And the way that we did this was primarily through an awareness campaign that went on for 3 months towards the end of the year, with other activities spread out throughout the year as much as the pandemic allowed. And this campaign was primarily included radio and TV interviews. We had social media campaigns on Facebook and Instagram. We had articles in the newspaper, we had press releases, and we also had animated videos that helped to break down some of the more complex terms relating to integrity. And what's important to note here is that we have noticed over time that there's more and more interest in the Integrity Chamber from the community, where more and more persons are reaching out to understand more about how we work and what we're able to do, what our functions are, and also inviting us to the table to have discussions within their organizations to see how integrity can be improved for them for the benefit of achieving their goals as well as having a pleasant experience in their work environment. Recently, we had 2 meet and greet sessions, one at the Simpson Bay Community Center and one at the Senior Citizens Recreational Center in Hope Estate for the Supper Garden community. And it was very well received. There were a lot of questions. There was a lot of eagerness to collaborate with us. We also recently launched a video series called Let's Talk About Integrity, where we discuss integrity for various topics with professionals on topics such as finances, the government finances, the international image, to try to relate how integrity impacts these areas of our country's well-being. And it was also very well received. The videos have upwards of 10,000 views and very positive responses. And we've also been engaging in info sessions that have been requested by various government departments, where we discuss integrity in their unique workplace context. We recently did several sessions with the Ministry of Rami. We had 3 days of sessions with them. And so it's clear that for the public, they understand the importance of integrity and they value having that conversation about how it can be improved and how we can benefit from that. Which brings me to the next slide, where we just want to touch on what the Integrity Chamber is ultimately trying to accomplish for the people of St. Martin and why integrity is important. And one of the reasons is economic growth. When we are accountable about how we spend our finances and we make fair, honest, and responsible decisions on our investments, that is the result. It also results in a lower crime rate. When people are provided with the things that they need and are given opportunities to chase their ambitions and their goals, you significantly reduce the incentive for crime. And then we're able to enjoy a safer society where our families can walk the roads with peace of mind. And one of the greatest outcomes is a positive national image. And there's a number of opportunities that can come from that, whether it's perhaps an agreement with a large country that no longer requires a visa, or trade deals that would reduce the expenses, the costs of prices of our goods and services, or even a university that chooses to offer a scholarship to our students. So ultimately what we want to accomplish is a higher quality of life for the people of St. Martin. And we can only do that together, because integrity is not just the Integrity Chamber's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. And if we all do our part, we can build a better country for ourselves today and for our future generations. And so with that, I would like to thank Parliament for hearing us and pass the floor to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Postman, Ms. Pompier, and Mr. James. Now I will look to my left to which member can I give the floor. MP Sarah Westcott-Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a good afternoon. Good afternoon to you, a good afternoon to my colleagues, and of course a good afternoon and a word of welcome to the members of the Integrity Chamber. Thank you for the presentation on your annual report 2021 and the explanation given as to the work of the Integrity Chamber. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I am sure the Integrity Chamber is aware of my correspondence with the Prime Minister regarding the budget of the Integrity Chamber. And that correspondence was dated somewhere in March of this year. And on the 31st of October of this year, via Parliament, I received a response to my queries regarding the effect of the cut in the budget of the Integrity Chamber. What did it mean? What was the budget that was submitted by the Integrity Chamber from the beginning? And what would a cut of 28.3% to the budget, what would that do to your operations? Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, on the 31st of October, I received a response from the Prime Minister, and I must admit that in that correspondence, the Prime Minister apologized for her tardy response to my questions. However, the Prime Minister did include, one, the budget as submitted by the Integrity Chamber for the 2.4 million guilders, because that was not specified in the budget that we received, but upon request I received it so I can see what the budget was that you submitted as Integrity Chamber to begin with. And I want to quote you from the letter of the Prime Minister, and maybe you can explain to me, because the Prime Minister also submitted to me your two letters, one of February and one of June of this year, regarding your budget and the cut in your budget. And I quote now from the Prime Minister's letter to me, stating, and I quote, "As a result of the decision of the Parliament in support of the amendment to the country's budget related to the functioning of the Integrity Chamber, extensive discussions were held with the Integrity Chamber to ensure their functioning for 2022 could remain effective. The budget amendment negatively influences the work of the Chamber, affecting its independence and conflicts with its purpose." The letter of the Prime Minister to me continues, "Internally, it was determined to enable the Chamber in executing its planned activities for 2022 and to meet its financial obligations. An amount of 300,000 was requested to be internally facilitated to the Integrity Chamber's budget for 2022 and is currently reflected in the proposed budget amendment before Parliament. Since then, the amended budget 2022 came to Parliament and was passed by Parliament. However, in that budget, the same amount of 1,772,932 guilders, as it was in the original budget 2022, is mentioned. So my question is whether the Integrity Chamber, if you know, can explain where the 300,000 extra guilders, as mentioned in the letter of the Prime Minister to me, where is that reflected in the budget, to quote again, and is currently reflected in the proposed budget amendment before Parliament. And so my question is the budget of the Integrity Chamber 2022, does it now stand at 2 million guilders? And where, if I look at the budget, where can I find the extra 300,000 guilders? From the statement of the Prime Minister herself, it is clear that the Prime Minister is of the opinion that the cut in the budget of the Integrity Chamber negatively affected and affects the operations and work of the Chamber. And I would just like to know where and how is, according to this letter, an additional 300,000 guilders for the Integrity Chamber reflected, if that can be explained, Mr. Chairman, and if the Integrity Chamber for this year has adjusted its own budget, which started at 2.4, which should have been now at 2 million, if you have an amended budget for yourself in terms of how you will apply your financials to your operation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Sarah Westcott Williams. Next person I have is MP Duncan. MP Duncan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you, the SG. Good afternoon to the members of the Integrity Chamber. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and a good afternoon to the people of St. Martin tuned in. Thank you to the Integrity Chamber for the presentation. Mr. Chairman, through you, I just have one question. We've heard a number of cases over the last couple of months, now this is 2022, about officers or civil servants being arrested for breaches of integrity, for corruption. And I would like to know if these cases would trigger automatically investigations by the Integrity Chamber, or is the Integrity Chamber looking into these cases as they come up? Because these are specifically civil servants who have been detained for actions that are, that are not integral at all. And that's just my question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Duncan. The next person I see is MP Bryson. MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to yourself, my colleague members of Parliament, and to the members of the Integrity Chamber as well. Good afternoon to you and to all viewing this meeting. Mr. Chairman, first of all, thanks for the presentation. I think it was very insightful, and I do have a few questions on that as well. But as to be expected, the question will come regarding the budget of the Integrity Chamber 2022, despite we're here to discuss the 2021. That's fine, I guess. I also would like to discuss this again, because I think this was heavily discussed in Budget 2022 debate. Mr. Chairman, we have in our system, we have the High Councils and the SER, and we have the Integrity Chamber, okay? The budget of the Council of Advice is 831,000 guilders. Alcamena de Kamer, General Audit Chamber, 862,000 guilders. The Ombudsman, which this Parliament has used very often and made use of those reports, the government as well, 864,000 guilders. The SER, which is going to soon have, if passed by Parliament, an amendment where the members of Parliament can make direct use now of advices from the SER rather than having to go through the Prime Minister, etc., 753,000 guilders. And the Integrity Chamber, before the amendment that I presented and that was supported by Parliament, was at a budget of 2,445,000 guilders. When I saw this budget in that debate, I had a question as to, okay, why? And how did we come to this amount? I go to the legislation of the Integrity Chamber in the financial paragraph of the law, and it states as follows. In establishing the various regulations in this regard, the government will also seek to link up what has been established for the High Councils of State and the Social and Economic Council. In view of the comparable range of duties, it makes sense to formulate the provisions of the Integrity Chamber in a similar way. The costs will therefore be comparable and annually between approximately 1.5 million guilders and 2 million guilders. These costs will be charged to the national budget after the co-financing of the Netherlands has ceased, which began in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, where the full amount is now at the cost of the taxpayers of St. Martin. Mr. Chairman, I want to say it very clearly. While others might have gone as far as to question the merit of the Integrity Chamber and whether it should have been here or not, or how it came here, that was never my point, and it's still not my point. I think the organization and the institution is an excellent one for St. Martin, and I think especially with what I've been seeing this year, we're seeing a lot more, as Mr. James pointed out, of the public relations, which is especially important in this day and age to keep not just the civil service, but the public involved as to what the chamber is doing. Mr. Chairman, we as Parliament have a budgetary duty. We have a budget that is extremely challenging. Yes, I can imagine it was hard for the Integrity Chamber. It was hard for all of the High Councils as well. It was hard with the 12.5% cut for all civil servants. And mind you, most of this, or a large part of that amendment, went towards adding additional funds to those other high councils that I mentioned. So, Mr. Chairman, my question at the time, and of course, we were speaking via the Prime Minister, but it would be good, because it's not the fault of those sitting before us why this budget was far over what is recommended by law. Somebody put this together. It was initially being funded by the Netherlands, and it was at 2.4 million. Now it came to the responsibility of this Parliament to make taxpayers' funds available for it. We choose to bring an amendment that brings it right in between, almost precisely between the 1.5 and 2 million guilders recommended. And I stated as well, I think even if it has to go to the upper end, well, then bring that as an amendment, but also adjust the necessary legislation and give us a breakdown as to, well, why it is. Because the other high councils, according to the law, it's supposed to be in line, but it's clearly not. And I would love to get an explanation as to maybe how the structure of the Integrity Chamber from a personnel and material cost perspective, why is it so much different than these other chambers? We have the Ombudsman that did a presentation recently, for example, handled over 120-something complaints. We have the Council of Advice that sends dozens of advices, maybe over 100 of them annually. On top of that, for the government as well, we see the role of the SET, etc. It is not at all intended to disparage the Integrity Chamber, but we do need to understand, okay, how did we come to this figure? And now that it's coming out of the budget of St. Martin, then we need to understand, well, what do you really need? In the 2023 budget, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy and would be in support of something that is in line with the law and is in line with what makes sense. I'm in support of raising all the budgets of all these high councils because they're so critical to what we do as members of Parliament. But it is unfortunate that you have some that will try to use this budget cut to make it more than us being fiscally responsible as members of Parliament. It's in the law. It is not MP Bryson that invented this figure. If I had opened this financial paragraph and it said something differently, I would not have even looked at that budget. But what do we do when we get a budget? Okay, boy, we know we need something here to try to do something for sports. Where did we over budget? We have to comb this thing with a fine-tooth comb. So through you, Mr. Chairman, with all sincerity to the members before us, understand that this had nothing to do with trying to stop your work or trying to play politics or anything other than that. It was simply we were not being given the full story or the full understanding as to why this chamber is budgeted so much higher than these others when the law was designed that it should be in line. And in most cases, or in all cases, it's more than double. Understandable that questions will be asked and amendments would be tabled, I think. And I would like to hear a frank response on that. And if you disagree, I can totally understand, but that's why maybe we're here, which can arm me with better information on what we should do in the 2023 budget. Mr. Chairman, I also was with interest listening to the part about Article 61 of the LMA regarding the confidential advisors. And I think a lot of people might look at it and think that that is something that's, that's you know, how they call it, snitching and all of this stuff. I will tell you why that's a very good thing to have in Parliament. I mean, in the government. And I guess in Parliament as well. Because what you have now, in absence of that, they are using unofficial confidential advisors, even some of them sitting in this Parliament, where instead of having a place to bring your concerns, now all of a sudden the trend has become, let's leak it to certain members in the Parliament, and then it comes on the floor of Parliament, and the worst part, totally out of context. And I want to give one very good example of that. In this whole saga with the garbage contracts, for months we're hearing missing bank statements, and he get the property because, and even though he didn't have the bank statements, because one part of the story was delivered into the hands of some members of Parliament. When the debate finally took place and the full documentation was given to Parliament, guess what? Where the bank statement was missing, that company was not awarded the contract. And for months, that company had to be dragged, a local company, had to be dragged through the mud, that He had missing bank statements and he get a plot of land. No, read what it said. I put it up on the screen. And that is why I think it's good. If civil servants feel the need to go and point out these things, then it should indeed be done the way the law states, where there's a confidential advisor that receives the information and then investigates it. And after verifying the information, every 6 months, a report is drafted and given then to the Prime Minister. And then the Prime Minister now can say, okay, with all the information in sight, now I see a breach of integrity and I'm going to deal with it. But the trend we have now without the confidential advisors is now it's coming to the blogs, it's going to the newspaper, and it's half the story many of the times. And it damages the people that we serve, and it damages the civil service itself. So I'm very happy to hear that, and would like to hear maybe, has the Integrity Chamber heard back any reports on the implementation of this? How is it going? Are reports coming in? And what is your view on another breach of integrity, which is actually the leaking of information? Because yes, we want to have a whistleblower policy, but there's a reason why Article 61 in the LMA exists for this confidential advisor. But you know what's also in the LMA? Article 82, confidentiality. Mr. Chairman, I understand that sometimes maybe some might feel it's like an advantage for them to kind of get the document and then wave it in here for political reasons. But you're also putting people in trouble, those very same civil servants, or maybe managing directors of airports, or those people are being put at risk when the politicians is trying, but give me that information now, I'm gonna bring it in Parliament. And then when you find out, for example, that some documentation is now being watermarked, where you didn't even realize that you leaked that information, but because of that watermark, your department head is now able to verify you leaked it. You lose your job. That parliamentarian that made you leak the information, he or she keeps his job, but you're in trouble. So I think it's very good to establish a very strong system of quote-unquote whistleblowing, so that this whistleblowing happens in the right place. Because it shouldn't happen with members of parliament and parliamentarians immediately. It should come to parliament after everything has been verified, for example, by means of a systemic investigation or reports, etc. So those would be my main points, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you.
Thank you, MP Bryson. Anyone else? I don't see anyone else, but I might have one question. What impact are you creating in the schools? Like, are you going and doing any workshops or any presentations in the schools? That'll be it from my side. I would now see if you are ready to answer, or would you need some time? Ready to answer?
Mr. Chair, can we get 15 minutes to go over the questions and come back?
Okay, let's adjourn the meeting till 4:15. Meeting adjourned. Welcome back, and now I would give the floor to Mr. Raphael Boseman for the answers posed by the members of Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I will turn it over right away to Director Pompier, who would start answering the questions.
Thank you. The first question is from MP Westcott. The question was, has the budget of Integrity Chamber been increased to $2 million, and where is additional 300,000 guilders reflected in the budget of the Integrity Chamber? We had a commitment from government, indeed, that the budget would be increased to $2 million. We do not have that on paper, so we don't know where that's reflected in the budget, so I cannot share that with you, unfortunately. But we have amended our budget to the $2 million as because of that commitment, which actually allowed us to start certain activities in the second half of the year, which were actually put on pause in the beginning of the year when the budget was originally cut, because that also cut our ability to be able to do certain things. Does that answer your question, MP? Sorry. For me, that was it for MP Westcott. MP Duncan asked if cases of officers and civil servants being arrested for breaches of integrity trigger investigations. The short answer to that is yes, that can trigger an investigation by the Integrity Chamber. It doesn't always have to. A lot of the times, what we would do is contact the ministry or the minister regarding certain cases to see how things are being handled. And sometimes the ministry or the minister would reach out to us also to ask for advice. So it doesn't necessarily have to turn into an investigation, but it can. Then the questions from MP Bryson. The first one regarding the budget. Why is the budget integrity chamber so different than other high councils, and the amount of it? I'm going to hand over to Mr. Boseman to answer that question.
Thank you. The MP Bryson gave a good explanation as to the motivation of why the budget cut, etc., was proposed in the first place. I would like to start by saying that the Integrity Chamber acknowledge and respect the task of Parliament of oversight, and especially financial oversight, and would always be as transparent as can be when dealing with public funds. However, there needs to be some explanation given, further explanation given as to what MP Bryson outlined as the purpose for making such a decision. And the purpose outlined would be that in the ordinance, and specifically not in the law itself, but in the articles of elucidation, which serves as a guideline and an elucidation, and is not the law itself. But there, indeed, it is stated that the budgets, the finance, the cost of the Integrity Chamber would be comparable, or should be comparable to the other chambers. It also said up to 2 million guilders. So at that time, and it is not, this took place before the Integrity Chamber became operational. The figure of 2 million was decided upon in the period of setting up the Integrity Chamber. So during the phase of the quartermaster phase, which Mr. Lauder and myself serve as quartermasters, because we needed to establish a budget. What is it going to cost? we too look at those articles of elucidation, and being that the comparison was made with the other councils, the high councils and other councils of advice based on that article in the Constitution, one of the first things that was done was to consult with these councils. So as quartermasters during that period, we sat with each and every council and consulted with them. And the idea and the intention is absolutely not for us to sit and compare ourselves or even try to question the operations of any one of the other councils and how they establish their budget. We can talk about the Integrity Chamber. Our consultation with them was because of what was mentioned in the article of elucidations. We wanted to hear from them roughly what is their budget and how are they being able to do their task with the budgets that they have. Each and every one of these councils indicated at the time that their budgets was not sufficient. Each and every council indicated that there were challenges in doing what they would need to do exactly because the budgets that they had at the time allotted to them was not sufficient. I think as quartermasters, having heard this, it would have been irresponsible for us to suggest to establish a budget to an amount that we at that time already knew would not be sufficient. And the same articles of elucidation allowed a play up to 2 million guilders. Now, I would like to draw special attention from the honorable members of parliament. At that time, no one knew what it was actually going to cost. At that time, we had to set up the secretariat, the formalities, everything had to be done. And in the negotiations at that time, that was between government and government, so St. Martin government and the Netherlands government, and based on the report of the quartermasters, that a figure of, for instance, 1.5 million or 1.6 million would turn out not to be sufficient if we compare already the tasks that we would have to do. It was then decided by the respective governments that we would sit at the figure of 2 million. So we started, when the Integrity Chamber became operational, it started with 2 million guilders. At no time was the expenses, the cost of the Integrity Chamber estimated to have been lower than 2 million guilders. It was just like establishing a business that would need the base amount of 2 million guilders to operate. And then the political part was that the two governments decided of how those payments would be, first year, second year, third year. That is out of our purview. Once operational, okay, then it started to become clear what the actual costs would be, what exactly amount we would be. So that's we would need. So that is why the first couple of years, at least the first 2 years, we operated based on the 2 million guilders, and when we had a full secretariat, and still not a full secretariat because we did not fill all of the formatie plaatsen in the secretariat, okay? And with an indication as what it would cost us to carry out the tasks that it would need, that is where that budget, I think that went to the budget that we sent in to 2.4 million. That is what was estimated that to do all of the tasks that we would need to do in the way that we would need to do it in a professional way, with local expertise where available and maybe expertise from abroad if necessary. When you put all of that together, and especially with all of the awareness campaigns, et cetera, that had to take place, that a request was submitted for a budget of 2.4 million. So with all due respect, but with comprehension for the explanation of MP Bryson, it is not that the law or the articles of elucidations were violated. We are within the articles of elucidation. The articles of elucidation use the budget of the other councils and say, as a matter of fact, that would indicate more of a minimum than a maximum, because it would be in line of that. And the articles of elucidation also indicated the 2 million. It is mentioned there. So I don't know, in the decision of cutting the budget, from all the discussions, the budget figures of the different councils were mentioned, but at no time did I hear mention that the same articles of elucidation in the same chapter explaining the same budget also mentioned the figure of 2 million. So in all fairness, I think that should be looked at, and I hope with this explanation, the question as to how we get to the 2 million, that would have been explained, and I think the director has indicated in writing to the Prime Minister in explanation and answering questions to Parliament the need for having the budget of the minimum of 2 million, but then not being able to do some of the things that we need to do, right? And to operate the way we would need to operate the 2.4 million. And I hope with that, MP Bryson, I could have elucidated that more. One thing I'd like to mention also is that the manner in which it happened, there was no prior consultation to that effect with the Integrity Chamber. And if that, I think, had taken place, maybe we could have more in a how you say, in a different manner, could have elucidated the position and even shown. The Integrity Chamber cannot and will not be talking about integrity and trying to encourage others to be integer while we would be proposing budgets of monies that we don't need. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would, you have more questions to ask. I'll turn back over to Ms. Pompier.
MP Bryson had some other questions. One was regarding the confidential advisor and the implementation thereof. The Ministry of General Affairs is still working on the implementation of that advice, so we do not have confidential advisors yet, but we are also working with them to get that done. One thing we find very important is that we don't just give an advice and they have it sit there, but we try to follow up as often as we can in order to help where possible to make it happen. So I hope that the next time we're in Parliament, we can confidently say that those advices have been implemented, but are still being worked on. I just would like to clarify one point, though, with regards to confidential advisors. It's not the task of the confidential advisor actually to investigate anything. They're simply there to guide the person who has an issue on what to do, and they can also signal it to management. But the idea is that that information remains confidential. That's why the name confidential advisor, because you want that people can talk to the confidential advisor without fear of retaliation or reprimand. So when it comes to an investigation, that would definitely be the role that the Integrity Chamber would play, and that's why it's also possible when it's that far for persons to do notifications, that they can do that at the Integrity Chamber, and we could definitely investigate that and help to solve the issue. MP Bryson also had a question regarding breaches of confidentiality. Oh, sorry, leaking of information. What is the Integrity Chamber's view on leaking information? We agree that that is definitely an integrity issue, and it's one that we have seen. You know, we read the news as well, so we know that that is an issue. And by talking to different ministries, also via the quick scans, we have learned that that is an issue, and that's something that we plan to help the organization with as well when it comes to awareness on the importance of keeping things confidential. So part of what we do also when we give information sessions and workshops is talk about issues such as the importance of confidentiality within government. And finally, the question from MP Bijlani, and I'll leave our communications officer, Kevin James, to answer that question.
Thank you, Director Pompier. Through you and to you, Mr. Chair, I want to say thank you for that question. I'm really glad you asked. It is in our list of objectives for 2023 to approach the schools. In 2021, we also had an intern for the first time, and his assignment was actually to come up with a strategy to raise awareness about integrity to his classmates. And that was a starting point for us to see the level of inspiration that we got from him. And that is what we look forward to doing in 2023, to approach the schools.
Thank you for your answers. I look to my left and I already see MP Bryson would like to take up some questions. MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks once again to the Integrity Chamber for the responses to all the questions, including my own. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the response from Mr. Boseman regarding and again, it was one of my motivations for why I brought that amendment, which is related to the elucidation. Mr. Chairman, in any legislation, the elucidation is part and parcel of the legislation. So I don't want the impression to be keeping that, yeah, but you know, that's just a guideline. It's a little bit heavier than a guideline. It is actually it gives you the motivation and the explanation as to why this article says what it is. And in every piece of legislation, even if there's no financial effect, you still write financiële gevolgen. Okay, er zijn geen financiële gevolgen. You still elucidate on that part. Every single law has to give an explanation on the finances, a financial effect of the law. Mr. Boseman points out, yes, the top amount, the maximum amount is $2 million, and I addressed that in the budget as well. You create a law with the mindset that this is something that's going to exist for 10 or 20 years. So when I read the elucidation, I would think that when a range is created, it looks at it as, well, you know what, it might start up at 1.5 and eventually grow its way to 2 million. You know, so again, that isn't really to me that, you know, 1 year or 5 years into its existence that the Integrity Chamber is already now at its maximum, because that is counterproductive to the Integrity Chamber, because the Integrity Chamber might need to grow between now and the next 10, 20, or 50 years or whatever existence we'll have. So I don't think it's prudent actually for the Integrity Chamber right now to be at its maximum, because that will stunt the growth potential of the Integrity Chamber. The more that these activities to promote integrity are happening, the more reports you might get. You might need to expand the Integrity Chamber as a result. So I still think actually it's very alarming that the Integrity Chamber right now is saying we need 2 million and we're acknowledging that that's the maximum, but we're there. So then I have a concern then about the ability of the Integrity Chamber to grow. So perhaps what might be necessary is an analysis, and that would be my next question. Has the Integrity Chamber, I know that, I don't know how that happened, but I believe any changes to this law does need Kingdom approval. Has there been any, let's say, review of this legislation for these little aspects to say maybe we're going to change some parts of this legislation? Because yes, it was drafted before, then you had quartermasters. Since then, we've noticed some changes. Are there proposed changes coming maybe to the law from them as well? Mr. Chairman, again, what I heard today actually is extremely alarming, because when you think about what we're really hearing is that not so much about the integrity chamber needing this budget. For me, what I hear is that our other high councils are not slightly under budgeted, but extremely under budgeted. Because if quartermasters are sitting with these chambers and saying, well, no, we have a low budget, and then the figure ultimately comes up to 2 million, well, the average of our other councils, and I just put it up in Excel here to see, it averages 827,000 guilders. That's where their average is at. But if this newer institution of a sort of similar function is saying, no, we need at least 2 million, then we actually maybe need to now look at our other high councils and see where they really are and how it is they're able to function, or what are they missing out on. Because, for example, if you look at the SED, then they're operating at 31% of where they should be. That's what is actually quite alarming to me. If it is indeed that this is what this institution needs, then maybe those institutions need it as well, which is going to cause a huge effect on our budget, because if we were to raise them to 2 million, that would be an increase in 5.8 million guilders a year. That's a significant amount of money that would have to be available. If we say, you know what, to be fair, let's get them all at the same level, that's a huge increase in our budget. So again, I think this exercise was one that was needed. We need to look closer at the rest of these institutions. And one other thing I want to mention about the consultation aspect. And some people might take this whatever way, but it's no secret that I've had intense discussions with the Prime Minister on this amendment. And the Prime Minister wasn't very happy with it, to be very frank. She was defending the position of the Integrity Chamber. I, as a Member of Parliament, when I'm interacting with the budget, I interact with the government. The government interacts with these institutions. And why, one of the main reasons her defense of this budget failed was when I looked at the immense amount in the travel budget. That is, I believe it was close to 400,000 guilders. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a large amount of money. And I understand that there's board members abroad and so on. But again, if that is something that is hampering the cost, then maybe we need to change this organization where it's understood that board members that are not abroad will meet online, for example. Then all of a sudden you have a huge savings right there. Maybe adjust that into your legislation or into your policies or whatever. But I didn't see what was presented to me. I didn't see anything that was going to cause, let's say, the Integrity Chamber to close down. And if that was the case, then maybe that had to be communicated differently somehow. I think that that is a situation now that we have the Integrity Chamber with us and they're saying, no, well, we really need 2 million to operate. Then again, we have the 2023 budget. I look forward to see what's going to be in there, and I look forward and would encourage the Integrity Chamber to give as deep an elucidation as possible, because what also happened in the budget debate, in the policy part of the budget, there was no, let's say, written description or elucidation to your budget. So let me don't say no, I stand corrected. There wasn't a detailed breakdown of the material cost. When we got that after I was questioning on it and then got the information. I would encourage the Integrity Chamber to ensure in the upcoming budget that there's as broad as possible a breakdown. Just like, let's say, per ministry, you have all of the different breakdowns, different economic categories, whatever. If that can be included in the upcoming budget, it would help a lot. Then maybe MP Bryson doesn't have to be the bad guy this time in 2023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Bryson. I see. Next person here is MP Angelique Rumu. MP Rumu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A pleasant good afternoon to you, pleasant good afternoon to my colleague MPs, and of course a pleasant good afternoon to the Integrity Chamber here with us this afternoon. I just have one question as it pertains to, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Integrity Chamber. As I watched your presentation, I too was very happy to see that a confidential advisor or confidential advisors has been advised to government in order to be able to liaise when someone may come across integrity issues, etc. However, in your answer to, I think it was MP Bryson, I heard you say that of course, there's none currently. They're busy probably figuring out how they would get that in place. But you did mention that if someone was to report to the confidential advisor, this person then would report, so the confidential advisor would report to management. So my question is, what if the person wants to complain about management? You know, how then does that, how would then the confidential advisor operate? Because the person might feel threatened, you know, and might not want to because it's the manager. So I just want to know if that has been worked out in details as to, you know, if it also pertains to that person who's in authority, then what is the next step? That's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Ramu. I see next person on the line is MP Sarah Westcott Williams. MP Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank the members of the Integrity Chamber for their answers, and I can understand that my question could not be answered by the Integrity Chamber. The fact remains that in a letter to Parliament, the Prime Minister said, and I paraphrase, that the budget of the Integrity Chamber would have been adjusted to 2 million guilders. The budget 2022. The amended budget 2022 has been passed by Parliament, and the same 1.772, etc., that's 1.7 million guilders, is just as it was when we received the original budget 2022. But of course, as the Integrity Chamber, Ms. Pompier indicated, they don't have the information. They only got a commitment by the government. However, in writing to Parliament, the Prime Minister indicated that the budget will be supplemented in the amended budget that would have come to Parliament. It came to Parliament and the amount has not been amended. I just want to make sure that that is clear, and I will be questioning the Prime Minister and the government on this matter and the information that has been submitted to Parliament, which until now I maintain is not what it is in reality. And I put it like that, not to say that the government has misinformed Parliament in this regard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to again thank the Integrity Chamber, and I unfortunately have to take leave from this meeting. I thank you.
Thank you, MP Sarah Westcott Williams. I don't see any more MPs having any questions, so I will look to my right if you're prepared to answer right away or you need some time. Want to adjourn? You're going and answering right away? I would give the floor to Ms. Pompier. Ms. Pompier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First to MP Bryson. I'm glad you mentioned again that the other councils indeed would likely need an increased budget, because we do think that's the case. All of us have our respective tasks and responsibilities, and we all need the financing that is necessary to be able to do that to the best of our abilities. Refer again to the 2 million in the elucidation of the law. In our opinion, the elucidation does not limit the fact that if there is an increase necessary, that would not be able to be possible. The time when the elucidation was written, that is a momentopname. So at that time, we really are looking at the information that you have at hand to be able to write that. And if new information becomes available later on, that does not, stop the parliament, I would say, or government from being able to submit a different budget with figures. And we, as an integrity chamber, shall make sure that there is a more detailed elaboration of our budget for Parliament for 2023. The next question from MP Ramu with regards to the confidential advisors having to report to management. Just to clarify, that is actually not the case, that they would have to report something that they heard to management. That would actually defeat the purpose. You mentioned that correctly, because people need to be able to feel safe to go to those confidential advisors, so that information remains confidential. However, what I was trying to explain is that they can give signals of different issues that they are receiving. And based on those signals, the management can probably then take certain actions to help, whether it's with different policies or with an awareness when it comes to certain integrity issues. So based on signals, they can start to do something as management to improve the situation, but not that they are going to report to management something that was specifically reported to them. That is not the case. Okay, yes, so that would include when it involves a manager, that they definitely can go, because the confidential advisors have no obligation to report back to a manager. And the LMA also makes it clear that they cannot be reprimanded for their work as confidential advisors. So that safeguards them a little bit as well for a manager who might want to be, hey, tell me what you received the information this week. No, managers can't do that. The confidential advisor has a sort of dispensation, you can say, so to speak, when it comes to the information that they receive. Yes, that was it for me.
Thank you, Ms. Pompier. I see to my left, I think MP Rumu has a question. MP Rumu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's more of a clarification, because I'm still missing the part of, but what happens when it is the manager? So then who would the confidential advisor report to? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Rumu. I see to my right if there's any further explanation on that point.
Yes, so the confidential advisors, and that's part of our advice, they would form a sort of a committee, because there's more than one, and they would have somebody in charge, basically, who they would give information to. But it's not a manager. It's also a reason why in our advice we say managers cannot be confidential advisors. So when it comes to a manager itself who was doing something that somebody might want to report to, the confidential advisor would can also guide them to make an official complaint somewhere. If they cannot do that internally, they can come to the integrity chamber. But at no point does the manager have to get involved if there is a complaint against the manager. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Ms. Pompier. And I see on the list I have MP George Pantherflit. MP George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to the chair, my colleagues in Parliament, of course, Griffith, and our guests from the Integrity Committee, Integrity Chamber, sorry. I didn't ask any question per se. I listened to the question posed by my colleagues and the responses that were given. My colleague MP Mu asked a question in regards to the issue of who the posting the report to. My question was and you answered it a while when you responded to her as to the fact that it's the confidential advisor, it's a committee. My question is, through Mr. Chairman, is it has to be civil servants? Is that correct, number one? And if that's the case, who determines the criteria or requirements for someone to become or be appointed or whatever as a confidentiality advisor? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP George. I see MP Bryson. MP Bryson, you have the floor.
Right. Thank you. Just also on that point, because I had based on how it reads in the law. Isn't there also a step where the confidential advisors report twice a year to the Prime Minister, so that they also then kind of send reports so that the Prime Minister is aware of these potential breaches as well? And then is it maybe the expectation that the Prime Minister is who then engages the Integrity Chamber with the breach? Because that I didn't really understand if that might be the kind of the process.
Thank you, MP Bryson. I see the next person, MP Brownville. MP Brownville, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to the Integrity Chamber, to my colleagues and listeners. I just had a few questions I wanted to add. That it's kind of broad, but if you can give me some answers to it. How do you take the complaints seriously? Do you take all complaints and just start an investigation? Also, what is the process now of carrying out an investigation? What are the investigators' experience? Like, is it outsourced or the local? How are the punishments then? The level of punishments? How valid are them when it comes to lack of integrity? How valid are the punishments? And is there any relationship? Is there a relationship between the Ombudsman and the Integrity Chamber? Thank you.
Thank you, MP Brownbill. No more questions further. I will look to my right if you're going to jump in right away. Ms. Pompier, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, MP Pantaflet. Do confidential advisors have to be civil servants? The law is written for it to be civil servants, but government can also have an external confidential advisor if they would like. That would be their prerogative. Of course, that would be more funds, so that might be an issue. But a confidential advisor does not necessarily have to be somebody internally. The law is written for it to be civil servants, and the civil servants then get certain tools, etc., to be able to do their job. But it doesn't have to be civil servants. And who decides the requirements for someone to become a confidential advisor is a very good question. If you read our advice on the confidential advisor, we actually go into a lot of details on that, because the law isn't very specific where that's concerned. So we give a lot of recommendations on what are things that they should consider when it comes to selecting a confidential advisor, and the things that a confidential advisor needs. One of the things that a confidential advisor would need to be able to do their job properly is also a code of conduct. So all of that is mentioned also in our advice for the confidential advisor. And then MP Bryson also had a question relating to that when it comes to reporting to the Prime Minister, and does she report then back to the Integrity Chamber? That is possible. The confidential advisors, they basically have to report on the issues that they are receiving. So not details, not not persons who came to them or anything, but they have to talk about the types of issues that are being reported to them. And that would help the organization, of course, to also take action to prevent certain things that are happening often. If the Prime Minister decides that she would like to get to report something to the Integrity Chamber for advice, that is possible. But like I said before, the advice can also be to that the person who is going to the confidential advisor also comes directly to the Integrity Chamber with a notification, and based on that, we can look into it. Then the questions from MP Brownbill. The first one was regard to the complaints. So I guess that was relating to the notifications. The law gives very, gives some guidelines as to what a notification should entail. So one of the things that's necessary is the grounds, so to speak, of a notification. So we don't investigate based on hearsay. So you have to kind of indicate, okay, yes, this is something I witnessed, for example. This is something that I have some other information on that I can, show that, this is going on. So that is, I think, one of the most important things, that you have some sort of grounds. What we do when we're doing an investigation is that no matter what complaint or notification comes in, we take it very seriously. So even if the complaint might seem as if, oh, okay, there's not enough grounds, we don't just dismiss it, but we talk to everyone or the notifier, so to speak, that sends in the notification. So based on that conversation, we can also decide, okay, hey, no, there's actually more here than we thought initially that was written on the notification. Then the level of investigators' experience and who they are. So we do have in-house people who are trained to do investigations, but depending on what we are investigating, we might also need external experience. For instance, it might be a situation where we might need an IT specialist or some other forensic specialist, and so then we can also hire that person in if necessary, because we cannot have all expertise in-house, unfortunately, as much as we would love to. And the level of punishments was another question. So we don't do criminal investigations. So at the end of the day, we're not looking at the individual that did something wrong. We're looking at the process that went wrong. So our advice would be, yes, okay, we saw that this process went wrong, and here's advice to fix it. That doesn't mean that there might not be any consequences for an individual that did something wrong, but that would be then on government to decide what the punishment is for that individual. So the Integrity Chamber would not say, hey, that person has to be locked up. Now, that would, we're primarily looking at the process to try and improve that process so that whatever happened, is prevented from happening again in the future. And the last question, what is the relationship between the Ombudsman and the Integrity Chamber? Well, I would hope that the Ombudsman agrees with me that we have a good relationship, just like we do with all our other councils. We try to meet with each other to discuss different things that we are experiencing as different councils. So I would say that yes, we have a relationship, and that relationship is a good one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Pompier. I see MP Richardson. MP Richardson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues. Good afternoon to the Integrity Chamber. I would like to know if there's an issue or integrity situation between the chamber itself. How would you handle it, and what is the procedure? Do you have a policy put in place to handle it? And if not, when are you going to work on something to get it together so that you can deal with issues if they're popped up anytime between the chamber itself, the integrity chamber? Thank you.
Thank you, MP Richardson. I see to my right. Ms. Pompier, you have the floor.
Thank you for that question, MP Richardson. Yes, we do. We do have procedures to handle internal integrity issues because we have a supervisory council who basically makes sure that we are doing what we need to do, and if there's anything that we're not doing that we shouldn't be doing, then they can take action where that's concerned. But we also have our own internal policies within the Integrity Chamber, such as code of conduct and other policies to help ensure that they are that we avoid as much as possible integrity issues. The law also makes sure that there are no conflicts of interest where that's concerned. The law is very specific that the Integrity Chamber, for instance, can't be on boards of other organizations that we are authorized to advise on. And we also internally have our own confidential advisors. In fact, we have 2 certified confidential advisors internally. So we, we try our best as an organization also to kind of practice what we preach. Thank you, MP Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Pompier. I see to my left, I see MP George Pantoflet would like to take the floor. MP George,
Thank you,
have the
Mr.
floor.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the answer to the question that I posed. The issue of the confidentiality advisor, why I mentioned the criteria, and it was said that they are predominantly, let's say, civil service based on the law, but government can also hire, let's say, a private company or institution. Government employees, civil servants, we work together. And I use, let me say in this case, let me just use my colleague, my schoolmate, former schoolmate, Mr. Boseman. We are good friends. Okay, we work in the same government apparatus and so on. Now, I find myself basically getting a complaint from somebody else on him. Now, how do I, because of a relationship, what do I do as a confidentiality advisor? Do I recuse myself, or how is there anything there that can actually determine exactly what behavior I should have as the confidentiality advisor based on my relationship with myself and my colleague? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP George. I would like, Ms. Pompier, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, to answer that question, I would have to clarify that the confidential advisors don't get complaints. It is the person who has a complaint that chooses to go to the confidential advisor. And one of the advantages with the government is that since you would have minimum 1 confidential advisor in every ministry, you don't necessarily have to go to the confidential advisor in your ministry. You can choose, for instance, to go to a confidential advisor in the Ministry of TEAT if you're working in the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Education or wherever that might be. So you as a civil servant, if you're not comfortable with confidential advisor A, you can go to confidential advisor B.
Thank you, Ms. Pompier. I don't see any more comments or questions. I would like to thank the representatives of the Integrity Chamber for their presence here today and for providing the necessary information. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this meeting. I thank you all for your participation, and I hereby close this meeting.